to Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 74, Vader. You just heard Demon's Wind. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Hey! Jason's back this week on our Vader podcast. That was from the Ultimate Incantation album. I am Mark Rudolph.
And I am Jason Hundy. Welcome once again.
Good to have you back.
Yeah. I've been away for a while. Mark and I actually haven't gotten together since, late August, early September. It was right before school started.
Yeah, it's been a while.
That's when I had my little housewarming shindig.
Yeah, we did Blew Through 6 podcasts in a couple of days.
And Grant Carcuna joined us for Melvin's podcast and then some other things. And then you were out west.
Jet setting, yeah. So, we had our punk show this week, and now we're going to completely go 180 and bring it to Poland for the first time with Vader.
Yeah, and I think it's long overdue because, the Eastern European metal scene has been pretty viable for, almost 20 years now. And,
look at Behemoth, Decapitated. There's tons
Yattering,
of... Yeah, Blast from the Past.
Yeah, Oh no, Belfagor's from Austria, I think. So not quite east.
Nobody likes Belfagor.
But you know, like the Czech metal scene was pretty big there for a while, like the late '90s and early 2000s and stuff. But you know, I think the band that, in my opinion, kind of deserves the credit for sort of establishing that scene has to be Vader.
When they were kind of like the eternal underdog forever, when Ultimate Incantation came out, was it 92?
Mm-hmm. On Earache.
On Earache, that was like Earache's, that was like the era of Earache, you know, everything that they were coming out with was just fantastic. And I think the record got reviewed fairly well, but as far as actually being, like, getting any kind of clout, I don't think anybody really cared. I think it got a lot of Deicide comparisons, which I can see a little bit of it. It's a little bit more skilledly played, I think, and not quite as redundant as a lot of the Deicide stuff is. I mean, they did a couple decent records, but I don't know, for some reason Vader always stood kind of like head and shoulders above that kind of death metal for me.
Well, I know, like, when I first heard Ultimate Incantation from Chris when I was a sophomore in high school, you know, I wasn't that intimately familiar with anything that was like non-Swedish death metal in terms of European death metal. You know, I obviously knew like Morbid Angel and Corpse and Obituary and all that kind of stuff. And so Ultimate Incantation sounded a lot more like that stuff than it did the kind of Stockholm sounding stuff. So I just kind of passed Vader off as being like, oh, like they're a pretty competent like band. Yeah. But they're like kind of just like an American death metal band. You know, like what you heard there in Demons Wind, you know, had like the sick, like, crunchy breakdown, like, at the beginning of that song, which is why I wanted to play it, because it's, like, one of my that was, like, my first favorite Vader song, if you will. But it wasn't until De Profundos where, like, I kind of thought, oh, these guys are different, you know, their like, approach to death metal, I think, is a little bit different than what I had imagined they were gonna do. And I think maybe that's, like, when you talk about Ultimate Incantation kind of being, I don't know, not slagged, but just it didn't really get much attention to it.
Yeah, just kind of crickets when it came out.
You know, I think it's probably because they hadn't really found their voice yet. It's a great record in hindsight. I mean,
even though they've been around since 1986, isn't that fun? Or 3 or something.
1983, actually, yeah. And that's the crazy part. You know, Vader started off as a very thrashy band.
I think they're a cover band for the most part.
Oh, were they really? Okay,
possibly.
And of course, you know, you had the whole. Guise of communism in Eastern Europe at the time, and so, you know, most of those bands couldn't get any exposure outside of, you know, the Eastern Eastern
recording European. For that, like, decent recording.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so they had a lot of, like, things kind of stacked against them, so it makes sense that they wouldn't emerge with their first, like, you know, great, you know, recorded record until 1992, you know, a couple of years after the end of the Cold War there. But the band is sort of like made up of the nucleus of really one guy at this point, and that's
we're just gonna call him Peter.
Peter, yeah,
because you know we're awful at pronouncing names.
Wizarek,
Piaitor. But we just call him Peter.
Peter Wizarek. I don't know. We'll go with that. I don't know. I don't know. I have no Polish in my background. I know a lot of Americans do, but
it's a difficult language to pronounce.
Yeah, exactly. I was there last summer, but I didn't.
You should ask.
Yeah, I think I looked around for Vader stuff a little bit when I was there. The only thing I found in Warsaw was, or not in Warsaw, I was in Krakow, was a sweet Power Slave coffee mug. So yeah,
that's something.
It's what it is. But you know, he was really the nucleus of the band. I would say through most of the music that we're going to be playing tonight, the other sort of guy that I think links the band together is the drummer,
Doc.
Yeah, Doc. That's the nice part about Vader, is they sort of made it easy with.
Well, they had Shambo for a while too.
Yeah, Shambo.
Like, their names are so hard to pronounce. So let's just come up with like weird cock rock names.
Mauser was the other guitar player for a pretty big chunk of time. So they must have like heard people like us butcher their names throughout the years, journalists and stuff like that, and then they just finally said, let's just go with simplistic nicknames.
Vog.
Paul, Vog, Rejash. Is it Rejash? Rejash? He's the bassist now in the current Incarnation.
Since 2008.
Or the current Incantation. Yeah. But, you know, going back to this record, you said that you had heard Ultimate Incantation. You know, Vader had some issues with earache, and that's probably one of the other reasons why this didn't get any promotion.
I think it was some kind of contract dispute. I'm not 100% sure on that, but there's lots of stuff online where you can read about Vader. So we're just going to give you the music a little bit today, but I actually saw Vader, it was either 92, 93 on a Deicide tour. And they were the opening act, and I remember I just looked up one of the old Requiem magazines and read my show review of it, and for some reason it stood out that they sat there and combed their hair like almost like they took it out of ponytails and like combed their hair before their thing. And for some reason that caught my attention. I wrote that in my my coverage of the piece or whatever. But they were fantastic live. They actually blew their monitors.
Oh, really?
It's probably because the place had such junk. This was at. God, was it
Blondie in Flint? No.
No, Blondie's used to be in Detroit. There's another place that we used to go to. I can't think of the name of it right now, but it's a really tiny club where the guy would always give us grief about guest lists.
Oh.
Because we were like 17 years old. No. It was another little place around there. I forget what it's called. But
that's funny.
No, they're fantastic live. They like blew Deicide out of the water, as far as I was concerned.
And actually, you and I are hoping to catch Vader this week.
This Wednesday, possibly.
Yes.
When the show goes up, we might be at Vader.
Yeah, exactly. But I think what's always been interesting, you mentioned the hair combing thing, and this is again, if you haven't seen like the Global Metal documentary, do yourself a favor. It's pretty fascinating in terms of like how different bands like take metal and approach it, because I think again when you're behind the Iron Curtain like they are. Mm-hmm. What little was sort of penetrating through, like obviously they were getting some of the musical influences, but it sounds like maybe they were also getting some of the unfortunate like ideas about like image and how like image was so important to metal, probably through the seeping of like what little MTV they could get, which was all the cock rock stuff in the 80s. So when you saw them in the early 90s, they probably had this like really weird amalgamated idea of what they were supposed to be as like a performing like metal act, in America.
That was the time too when you'd get bands, at least like some early earache bands, like people would crimp their hair and stuff. I mean, when Jeff Walker was like an electro hippies, he had that weird crimped hair deal. So.
Man, the late 80s, early 90s, the mullet was big. I mean, there's a lot of really bad stuff, No one really knew what to do with the big hair of the 80s, but...
Comb it.
Yeah, there you go. Apparently comb
it out.
But I think also what's cool about Vader is I've always felt that when you hear his like English and you hear like him in interviews, he has such like almost a really fun like broken English and like understanding, like the way his sentences are put together always used to make me laugh when I would read
I think
Vader interviews.
That's half the charm of their like song titles and stuff too. And that's same with like a band like Pyogenesis, where it seems like it's almost gibberish, but it's somehow endearing. Through their
because it's their like interpretation of like what they're supposed to sound like, or lyrically or songwriting wise, and you start to hear that personality emerge. I would say not as much on Ultimate Incantation, but like definitely with De Profundos and some of those kind of things. But we were commenting that like a record like Ultimate Incantation, or even the second kind of full length De Profundos, because of the power that like bands like Behemoth and some of the other Eastern European scene has started to like take on in the last 10 years, either of those two records really deserves a rightful place in like a Decibel Hall of Fame or something like that, because it really did start
before
that scene.
Before Behemoth, during all this, the super speed, super technicality stuff really came about. And I think Vader's sound almost sounds like they perfected it in a vacuum, and now there's not a whole lot of outside influences actually penetrate into it at all. It seems like it's more, they've just had this one singular vision, slowly kind of like refine it year after year after year.
Sure. And on a record like Ultimate Incantation, the kind of stuff you're hearing is, especially like Demon Winds at the beginning, which kind of like build, is a lot of those like open notes that we talked about with like Bolt Thrower and Asphyx and some of that. And obviously Asphyx is just sort of a spin, just like Obituary is of Celtic Frost, which is a huge influence on Vader.
I think Celtic Frost, Sodom, Slayer, for sure.
I was going to say the dive bombing is like famous that Peter does. He takes all the Slayer dive bomb leads and just like almost, it's like an orgy of them kind of coming at you a lot of times.
A lot of time for no apparent reason.
It's just, and again, that's
this would be cool.
That's the really cool charm about the band is they're bringing together a lot of the German stuff, the Creator, Sodom, the almost like simplified like riffing patterns, but like
I think
brutal,
out of any of the Polish bands, like Vader has the most just open chugging out of anybody, but it works really, really well.
Yeah, just like it works for like Asphyx or Bolt Thrower or something.
Yeah, and there's that whole another thing that I think separates them a little bit, at least out of the Polish scene, because not many of the other Polish bands really sound anything like Vader outside of the speed, like the speed of the drums.
But Decapitated did a little bit on that first thing, but they were like a little bit 17,
Yeah, and they're a little bit more speedy with like with their riffing, and Peter seems to he plays counter to the drums, like
Doc's
a blast
super
beat,
fast,
and then you'll just have like the slow opened kind of progression of notes, which it almost seems counterintuitive, but it really kind of like almost gives a groove to every part of the song.
Sure.
So
and it's different than like a band like Asphyx does that with the guitar stuff, but then the drummer's not playing as fast as say Doc will play. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, Asphyx never really goes into blast beats.
No, never. But like they have fast moments, but it's never like Vader's just blinding speed sometimes, and they really start to discover that. I think on De Profundos, you know, what I mean,
well, and that's when I think
Incantation's fast, but it's
Doc. You know, if somebody actually gave him some splash cymbals and stuff too, where he's doing all these little accents, and
yes,
that was right. I think that he did it like just right on, and that one is before like the glut of all the 15 Chinas and all this just cacophony of cymbals all the time.
Sure.
But the recording on that, you know, we were talking about that a little bit earlier, that the drums sound like they're all recorded live, like original, you know,
and
like
you'll hear that
takes.
in the next set when we
and there's
play
like
a couple tunes,
some goofy, like, you know, some tom sounds, but it all sounds like, compared to triggered, overproduced drums now, it sounds really fresh now.
Yeah, it has a cool organic sort of feel. So, but we're gonna kind of jump back into Ultimate Incantation. We're a little, you know, I guess, on the heavy end of these first two records, because it really is the foundation of Vader's sound, but also like the whole Polish death metal scene in a way,
and Vader's
owes a lot to this record. And
yeah, they've been accused of, you know, kind of bolt throwing their way through their catalog. You know, they are what they are. Yeah. But there's a little bit more of a, I mean, it's a very slight record-to-record progression, but because I always get into the mood where I'm like, you know, every, 3-4 years a new Vader record comes, I'm like, I've already got like 15 Vader records, including like their EPs and live stuff. Yeah. Then I hear it and I'm like, yeah, I guess I need it.
And especially the new one, which we're going to end the show with, is
Necropolis is fantastic.
Is a nice, pleasant breath of fresh air, if you will. But so we got a couple more of Ultimate Incantation, and we should mention the cover, because it's a
Dan Seagrave.
Yeah, it's a classic
total classic cover. It's like back when, you know, the era of classic like death metal, before the computerized crap that we got a couple years later.
Yeah,
it's actually,
and he was kind of like really would you say he was kind of a house artist for Earache in a way, because of doing the first couple Morbid Angels and Entombs and things like that?
Yeah, but then he did a ton of stuff for Nuclear Blast too.
Oh, that's true.
He was like the go-to guy, I think, between him, Christian Wallen, and
well, you mentioned Wes Benz.
Yeah, he was just, you know, he was there for a couple years.
He was like a flash in the pan kind of guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's got that kind of classic European Earache kind of death metal feel because of the cover and because of the production and everything. But so we've got anything to say about Crucified Ones or Final Massacre?
Oh, Final Massacre, I mean, both of those are super anthemic songs. Like the Crucified Ones, they've actually, I think they re-recorded.
They always play that live.
They play it live. They re-recorded it 2 or 3 different times. I'm surprised they haven't done, what the hell was the other one? Oh, Final Massacre more often, but Crucified One seems like one of their go-to.
Yeah, that's kind of like their
kind of thing. But
their pull the plug or something.
Final
like
Massacre is almost, I think I like better.
Yeah,
Crucified Ones has a good like sing-along chorus and stuff to it as well. But just how like epic Final Massacre starts out, and it's so simple and so heavy, and like I mean, it's basically we're just doing like power chords and some bends. Yeah. But they managed to, you know, make this super like epic song out of it.
And then Blood of Kingu, which is the first of 2 songs we're going to play from De Profundos, very, very catchy, and it's not as like dive bomby, I would say, as like Ultimate Incantation. It's almost like they start to streamline or rein in some of these like loose ends that Ultimate Incantation has.
Well, Ultimate Incantation was recorded in England.
Yeah.
And you can tell a big difference between the two, because I don't think at the time that De Profundis came out, there's actually many recording studios in Poland that were doing this kind of music. Yeah. So it seems like it's kind of like, well, what the hell do I do with this stuff?
Yeah, it does have a lo-fi kind of quality to parts of it. You know, it's not as dynamic, but it's, again, the songwriting is more focused and stuff, too. Yeah. And then we're going to pull out with Silent Empire, which we'll talk about. Very catchy at the end there. Just a little sing-along. So enjoy Crucified Ones, Final Massacre, Blood of Kingu, and Silent Empire.
Tingle Never but you live to die forever.
We just heard the Crucified Ones, the cries of the Crucified Ones.
Yes, the final massacre.
Then the blood of Kingu.
Inside the Empire!
From
De Profundis.
De Profundis.
Those last two from De Profundis, which were put out in 95.
Through many different labels. I have the original Croon. At the time, I was doing some correspondence with Peter, so I've got like the Sothis EP, and then like they did a Depeche Mode cover.
I Feel
You.
Yeah.
And what was it, Anti-Nowhere League? They did a cover of that and stuff too. They did some really bizarre covers.
We Are the League.
Yeah.
So. This was a hard record to get. I remember I had to wait for a while. I think either Pavement or somebody like put this back out, and I can't remember.
It might even been Hammerheart.
No, mine's definitely not Hammerheart, because Hammerheart put out like good quality stuff, and mine's like cheap.
Did put out good quality stuff.
Yeah, but I'm saying I bought this in the 90s. Who knows?
Metal. No, damn it.
Metal Mind put it out. Yeah, we're looking. I think it was. Yeah, there we go. Pavement Records. So we were just doing some quick research, but this was a hard one to find, and it's almost as if between Ultimate Incantation and this, I think for a lot of people, Vader kind of fell off the map, and metal was starting to change.
Yeah, they didn't have enough of an impact initially to keep people's attention. You drop off for 2 years.
Well,
in '95, that's
like the rise of Slaughter of the Soul. That's the rise of Gothenburg and different things.
It's kind of the drop of all the U.S. Sounding, I guess, death metal. And
so luckily for Vader, I think, a couple things happened. They put this record out, and then they also kind of re-explore their roots a little bit. And what they put out in between De Profundis and Black to the Blind, which is what we're going to hear some songs from next, is, I just wanted to make a special note of it, was a covers record called Future of the Past. And you were saying,
as far as cover records go, this is like, it's a really, really good covers record. Because, I mean, usually they're a dime a dozen now. Like, in the last year, Arch Enemy, Children of Bodom, like, everybody and their grandma puts out a stupid covers record. But this covers record, I think it actually shows every, like, okay, why these certain songs influence their direction. Like, more especially, like, the Terrorizer ones, the Sodom tracks.
Sure, Outbreak of Evil from Sodom.
Yeah, I mean, just
Death Metal from Possessed.
I think if you hear this, Vader makes a lot more sense to you.
Flag of Hate, Creator. All band, Merciless Death from Dark Angel and Dethroned Emperor. Celtic Frost is all over, Vader's sound. But what was interesting about this is this came out like 96, 97. I think I was junior in high school, and this is
when everybody's being swamped with keyboards and overproduced.
Well, not just that, but also the fact that I had heard Possessed, but never, I had heard of Possessed, but never heard them. I had heard of Dark Angel, never heard them. I had heard of Sodom, but at this point, like, this is when Sodom records were hard to get, like SPV stuff, like the old.
Yeah, they were all imports.
Destruction was really tough to get as well. This is pre-internet, really, in a way.
Well, pre-internet merchandise.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, like, this was like the first time that I heard a lot of these bands. First time I ever heard Terrorizer songs was on here.
Oh, really?
And this made me go and explore a lot of these older, bands from the 80s and
well, that's kind of like when I was younger. It was nice because I got, you get like the Death Walks Behind You, the Electric Rooster.
Atomic Rooster.
Electric Rooster. That could be a band.
Yeah.
The Atomic Rooster cover that Paradise Lost did, and I went out and got a couple of the records, and same with, Cathedral talks about Mellow Candle. Hey, I'll check that out. It was just like...
It was awesome.
It seemed like back then, like everybody, it wasn't necessarily all metal influence stuff either, but this, for the Vader's cover record, totally every single song makes sense.
Yeah. So
and they're like really good cover versions of it as well.
They're tight. Silent Scream from Slayer was tight, and I mean, at that point I was a huge Slayer fan, still am, but so I knew that tune, but then they they kind of I feel like De Profundis was there. It was like a hidden gem, and I think people like you and Chris probably knew about this record and probably gave it pretty good press. And then it seems like this is that weird transition of metal between 95 and 97. And 97, again, the bizarre era, which we've actually had requests from fans to do like a show just about that era, just
I fell out of it a little bit
explain it more.
I stopped following the scene. I'd still get Vader albums and a couple, like if Bride or somebody put out a record, but that was
things like that.
It was definitely a weird time for music.
Black to the Blind emerges in the midst of that, and Black to the Blind is like their Rain in Blood, really, in a way. I mean, it's probably 30 minutes long and 10 songs, just like Rain in Blood, and
they're all naked on the back. They kind of look like Creator on the back.
Yeah, they do. That could totally pass for a German thrash record, in a way.
But it was totally an answer to what the crap that was going on at the time.
Sure, but I don't think a lot of people appreciate it, because I think, in a way, death metal had kind of exhausted itself by 97, and people really weren't totally interested in what was going on. We're looking for symphonic, black metal or like melodic death metal from
this was just
and stuff.
Bludgeoning.
Yeah, it was. And the tune we're going to start off with, Carnal, is in particular very bludgeoning, and it's 2 minutes of just like the fastest drumming that Doc I think ever did up until this point. It's like stop start, like gives you a moment to breathe and then beat you down again. I compared it to like Blessed of the Sick from Morbid Angel type stuff. Where
it's an exhausting record.
Yeah, you feel like you get the crap kicked out of you. And then so we're gonna play two from Black to the Blind, that and Fractal Light. And Fractal Light had we were noticing some Exodus, Bonded by Blood stuff, some Creator stuff, and then in particular Napalm Death, sort of Celtic Frost breakdown.
It's the Napalm breakdown. Yeah, it sounds like a Harmony Corruption breakdown.
Yeah,
a Stuff for the Children kind of thing. But
so it's pretty hip. And then that was 97, and then 2000 comes out, and really they sort of play with the same themes, if you will, that Black to the Blind had, which is sort of the fast, to the point kind of songs. But the tune we picked out from that record, Litany, which was put out in 2000, is a tune called Xeper. And this is cool because I really feel like they build on a theme during the song, and they just take this theme and they just sort of manipulate the theme, and it's super catchy.
That's their whole blueprint. It's really simple, but it's basically like what thrash music was. All that it was muted, open stuff for the most part, like all the chunk stuff. And because I think probably Vader's biggest influence was thrash.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of how they started out.
Exodus and stuff like that.
Yeah, and they've just found a way to incorporate that into death metal, but not in a retro throwback kind of way, Municipal Waste or some party hard band.
Yeah. So and then Litany in particular, I've kind of. I remember buying this record in Prague, and so I guess I'm forever linked to that, if you will. That's where I bought that sweet Opeth Still Life shirt that, remember, I wore to Metal Fest, and everyone was like, where did you get this?
Before you could buy my
Before you could get Opeth shirts anywhere, so I kind of felt special. But anyways, I remember buying that record in Eastern Europe, so it's kind of cool. And then we're going to finish up with Revelation of Black Moses, which we'll talk more about that record and that song when we come back. So enjoy about the fastest Vader song you'll ever hear, Carnal, followed by Fractal Light, Xeper, and then the epic, slow, crushing revelation of Black Moses.
Seems like cock right into my mouth. I stand aside, I stay away, transmuting Michael Sherman. The diamond sea sword, the diamond touch, secret journeys, climbing worship, needs to find the praise. This word is those negations, my light is to live and open snakes to all on his last. That's rolling for the spits on it all. As winged eyes are blessed to see drunk deception of every pain. Transpierced time as my last adores. I don't find where time and space. Every time since starting my nail, thinking morning research. They count this time for here I count. Done with bread and baby souls. You were 110, 50 years old. Yeah.
So we heard Revelations of Black Moses.
Ooh.
And black as in evil. Not black as in African American.
Although Moses may have actually been...
well, we know that Jesus and Moses and everybody...
They were dark skin.
Yeah.
Maybe not like, Central African, dark, but definitely...
But they weren't wasp-looking guys like we see, in pictures everywhere.
Jesus had blonde hair and blue eyes, and he was built like the Incredible Hulk.
Oh, that's right.
Just how Michelangelo painted. But yeah, Revelation of Black Moses, and then Xeper from the Litany record, which was put out in 2000, and then a couple...
Fractal Light and Carnal from Black to the Blind.
Black to the Blind. So let's talk about Revelations, which is this record in 2002, which is Revelation of Black Moses.
Well, we actually hear, I don't know if it's a huge shift, but as far as like Peter's solos go, they seem to actually like follow the theme that he establishes early on the song. They're not quite as just, these crazy sounds that are dive bomb Slayer sounding things and just weird.
They're more soulful and melodic in a way, which is like really endearing. And I had to review this record for Eclipse, and I really got into this. This might be my most listened to Vader. I don't know if I'd call it my favorite. I think, I don't know. I think just for whatever's sake, De Profundis or Ultimate Incantation, just because it's just got that special magic quality that a band's first couple records usually have,
And it's after a while here, like all the songs or all the albums kind of blend together a little bit. It's hard to really pull. Like outside of like Black to the Blind has a really specific. Basically, you're hearing a different kind of production value.
Yeah.
But those first two records, that was like kind of laying out all their. How they're going to set up all their records from here on out, basically all these little snips.
But I feel like Revelations to me, and again, maybe the new record connects to this a little bit too, but Revelations to me is like the catchiest thing Vader ever wrote. A song we were not going to play, like The Nomad, very catchy.
Oh yeah.
And so it and even
or even like Wolf Tribe is
Wolf Tribe is pretty catchy.
And it's catchy. Like we've got like there's musically catchy, but Wolf Tribe's catchy in the chorus and his vocals.
Yeah.
So they're like really kind of there's not a
kind of I don't know, like a going to battle kind of quality to some of the songs, and you and I were talking about this. Whenever we listen to Vader doesn't bum you out. Vader makes you like sort of pumped up.
It's like thrash music.
Yeah.
Like really, like are you ever bummed out listening to a Slayer record? I'm not.
No.
Or anything. I mean, and we were talking, we've both had some cross country drives, and what pulls you through then at the 0 hour, I was like driving through like North Texas Panhandle. It was raining like hell, and I was super tired. I don't remember which Vader record, but I put a couple on and listened to them front to back really loud, and it got me through.
and it was it wasn't this record, but it was Litany and Black to the Blind. I was listening to when I was driving through Montana, and it was at like 4 a.m. driving through Montana, and my girlfriend at the time was passed out in the next seat, so it was me alone in the car, and it was one lane highway traffic because they had the barrels, so they're doing construction, and I was just like gripping, and I was literally the only car on the whole road, like anywhere, so it was like pitch blackness, and Vader like kept me alive, and then I ended up pulling in a truck stop.
So if you're ever feeling down,
hey, Vader,
put on a Vader record.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's the lesson we learned here today. So
and Peter's he's a really optimistic, like upbeat guy all the time too.
Yeah,
which is he doesn't really put on a whole lot of airs, I don't think.
Sure, and lyrically, I mean, Vader deals in some of the typical kind of death metal topics, but like Trey from Morbid Angel, he's also kind of getting into the Aleister Crowley, the
Necronomicon, Sumerian stuff, but a lot of it's almost like weird metaphysical stuff that just I don't know. You never hear Beelzebub, Satan's name.
No, not really
mentioned anywhere, and nothing seems. There's never, at least not outright, like torturous, like not like Cannibal Corpse.
No.
Kind of just ridiculous lyrics. Like his lyrics match enough, not that you can necessarily understand everything, but he's in the camp of vocalists, death metal vocalists. I think you can understand his
to some extent, yeah. And sometimes
especially
he gets like a Dave Vincent kind of feel to him too, but he also talks
and he rolls his R's a lot.
But I think what's cool too about the Sumerian thing, and this is what I remember noticing a lot on Black to the Blind and De Profundis, I think is where they brought this in, is kind of like how Carl from Nile will do this before each song. They'll give like almost a description of why he wrote this song and what the references in the song are going to be, and then the lyrics come afterwards. And I always found that kind of really interesting, being in high school, like, so they're really putting a lot of time and research into this, and not just like coming up with like, hey,
actually,
you know, what rhymes with Satan, you know? So
bacon, sweet, all right,
cool,
go for it.
But and Behemoth kind of followed suit with that too, so it's kind of neat. So, you know, we got to give Peter credit for all that. But and Revelation of Black Moses, from this record, Revelations, you know, slow. Just, you know, it has like
it's almost 7 minutes long, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's like epic Vader, you know. It kind of has like a Where the Slime Lives kind of like just grinding kind of darkness to it.
It's almost like, it's a long song, but it almost has like this undulating like vibe, or kind of like hook to the entire song, which, you know, that's kind of like Vader 101.
Yeah, exactly. And the next tune we're going to play, which is another tune from Revelations, is called When Darkness Calls, and it's got a lot of different elements happening with it, because
it's almost got like
black metal vibe, almost. Yeah,
like a black metal riff it almost sounds like something that would have been on like pre-De Mysterious Mayhem, but recorded really well. Yeah, like that type of riff.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's always a little bit of like dissonance to the back, like the rhythm guitar in these last couple songs as well.
And it's cool too, because at the end of When Darkness Calls, there's like a kind of a really cool breakdown, and it almost gets into like some Lombardo-isms, like kind of like what he does on like Live Undead, where Doc's just filling different things out and doing little drum tricks, and
because they seem like he's kind of running out of control, or like, where the hell is this thing gonna land? But he ends up coming back to it. It's almost just like he fall into the kit, kind of thing.
So pretty hip. And then we're gonna kind of skip through the rest of the 2000s pretty much. We're gonna play one song from Impressions in Blood, which that record came out, I do believe, in 2004 or 2005, something like that.
2006.
2006. Oh, The Beast, which we're skipping altogether, came out in 2004.
Which is a fine record, but they're not really doing anything different that is really worth talking about.
And I think we were going to play, Dark Transmission, I think, was one that you had picked out from The Beast.
Yeah, but we really kind of
ran out of time to play it.
And I think, didn't Xeper kind of cover some of the same ground that we wanted to...
Exactly. And so Impressions in Blood, the song we're going to play is probably one of the best sing-along Vader songs you'll ever get, and it's a wonderful little joyous tune by the name
Helleluyah.
God is Dead.
Yes.
So, and then we're gonna come out with our first of two songs from the brand new Vader record, which is called Necropolis, which just came out a couple weeks ago. So, and that will be Never Say My Name. So enjoy When Darkness Calls, Helleluyah, God is Dead, and Never Say My Name, just in time for the holiday season.
see my way. God is dead, dead. Hallelujah. God is dead, dead. God is dead, dead. Hallelujah. God is dead, is dead. Since your rebirth, I'm always with you. Deep in your mind, creative, protective, and never forget it. I was and I am in your vows, in your breath. I dwell in your dreams. I'm your life and your death. I stay with you every day, every night. You hear my whispers. I am your guide. So never again say my name aloud. Protect what you've got and keep it away from the crowds. Away from the crowd.
That was Never Say My Name from Necropolis, Helleluyah, God is Dead from 2006's Impressions in Blood, and then we started things off with 2002's When Darkness Calls.
Yes.
So we're winding things up here, and the new record, it's great.
Necropolis, it's Vader always surprises and always delivers.
Yeah, I mean, this is the most refreshing thing I've heard from these guys since probably Revelations back in 2002.
And it's yeah, I was thinking, to my ear, it sounds like they're actually taking the aesthetic they've created over the last 15 years or whatever, 20
really.
years. But it really has a good injection of the first two records, yeah.
Ultimate and Deep Profundis kind of mixed together.
Where we've actually got a lot of mid-pace stuff, but then there's a lot of super speed stuff as well. It just breathes really
which
well.
Which you just heard, Never Say My Name, has some elements of that speed kind of going on. That's a single that you can catch the video on YouTube.
Yeah, you can get it on YouTube.
Yeah. Hopefully, this record will finally bring them the coveted Frederick Award from the Polish Music
Grammy
Awards.
equivalent, kind of.
They've been nominated 4 times.
Yeah, we'll see if they get it for this one.
I think this is the record that's going to do it. So I feel like Stephen Colbert or something like that, like some obscure
Give him the
award
Requiem bump.
Yeah, exactly. But, yeah, is there such a thing? But
possibly.
We're going to end with the tune that ends Necropolis, and this is probably my favorite song off this record because it has the riff. That's what we've kind of named it.
It's the riff. It's like every Deep Purple, it's just
Motorhead, Celtic Frost.
It's like it'd be the first, like, if you go to your guitar teacher, I want to learn how to play heavy metal. Here's your riff.
Yeah.
But the way that they do it, and there's not a whole lot of change throughout the song, but the way they construct everything is just like super catchy.
Yeah, it reminds me of like how Napalm Death always brings out that Celtic Frost riff, like on Scum and different things like that.
Yeah, their breakdown riff.
It's just perfect, and you want it as simple and catchy as possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so you'll enjoy that. But it's called Where the Sun Drowns the Dark, and it has some cool like atmospheric things going on too. There's a little hint of some keyboard, which we heard keyboard in Helleluyah, correct? I do believe. Maybe.
Did we? We heard it off earlier on, I thought.
Oh, okay. Maybe it was on Xeper. I can't remember.
Might have been our memories are short.
Yeah, but Vader. It's very odd for Vader to venture out into sort of experimental like musical territory.
Usually, if they use keyboards, it's usually just to fill up the sound,
an accentuation of something. So, but we hope that you've enjoyed your introduction to sort of the world of Polish death metal, and Vader's definitely a good starting place. And I think Behemoth gets so much kind of attention that I think Vader oftentimes gets left out, and that's really sad and unfortunate because
there's the whole thing with imagery.
Yeah,
Vader's just been a bunch of dudes in t-shirts.
Yeah,
so.
and Behemoth definitely has nailed something down.
Yeah.
So. But pick up the new record, Necropolis. It's great.
We'll have a link in the sidebar on requiempodcast.com. Leave us some feedback either in the comment section. We've been getting some good stuff there. Go to iTunes, give us a favorable review if you enjoy the show, or just a star rating.
Find us on Facebook.
We're on Facebook. Just look up Requiem Podcast, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
or look up Mark Rudolph, Jason Hundy. Follow us as well. We love comments.
Yes, we do. So
send us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. And if you feel if you really like the show, you feel so inclined, we also accept donations for operating costs.
And there's some new merchandise up there. You got coffee mugs and t-shirts,
go to
which I joked all those years about coffee mugs, and here you go. You finally get a coffee mug.
But go to requiempodcast.com, click on the Baphomet with the t-shirt. That takes you to our store. We've got all kinds of lovely merchandise to show your
Christmas gifts.
For the show.
I think Christmas gifts.
They would be great Christmas gifts.
Yeah, Grandpa would love a Baphomet shirt. So, but enjoy "Where the Sun Drowns the Dark" from Vader's Necropolis. And for Requiem Metal Podcast, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.
Walk the hidden ways, mysterious and winter lands, paved with roads of thorns. Light is diminished and known, a world of total splendor, ravenous for devotion, where all gods possess the thrones, worship but those with no will. Yeah. Where the sun